You see the screen?
Yeah, it's starting. And if I play something, Dennis, and you can't hear it, or like you can hear me, just pop on and tell me, because I'll just keep going.
Welcome, everybody, running this session. We are very pleased to this year have the current National State Teacher of the Year. And it's a special privilege to welcome Tabitha Ross because she is the first preschool teacher that has ever been recognized with this honor. I know that there are many of us on the call that have interacted with Teachers of the Year, but it is a unique honor that this year we are welcoming a preschool teacher. I don't know how many visits I've been on where I visited schools where teachers will tell me how critical early learning is, preparing students for their transition into kindergarten and on into early elementary and then beyond. So to have this opportunity from a teacher that works in that environment is really an added value. Tabitha joins us from Winfield, Kansas, where she works in a preschool that is housed in Cumbernauld Village, which is a retirement community and nursing home. Students are able to have regular interactions with the residents of that community, which I'm sure provides a wonderful opportunity for both. Tabitha has been in the position for 10 years, and I'm sure as a dedicated professional sees a perspective on early learning that it will be important for us to hear about and exchange. If you have questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A function. We'll monitor those and get to those at the end. So with that, Tabitha, it's all yours. Thank you very much for joining us.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you for that introduction, Dennis. I'm so excited to be here. I am going to share my screen and we'll see, if I'm doing this right. So I'll do that really quick. Okay. And there it is. Perfect. Okay, now I can go to that. Hopefully you're seeing it nice and big now. But yes, good morning, good afternoon, probably where some of you are. Still technically morning here in Kansas. I am Tabitha Ross, and I'm the 2020 National Teacher of the Year and the first early childhood educator, like Dennis said, to be given this honor. I am a graduate of a fantastic teacher prep program at Southwestern College in Winfield, Kansas, where I came back and live now. Go Builders. But what I loved about Southwestern is that it felt bigger than my small hometown, yet it still had sort of that family-like feel. The kind of place where if you missed class, people noticed and emailed you. But I also love the relationships and the connections that it has continued to provide for me into my career. And I'll also plug where I'm getting my master's in teaching English as a second language at Fort Hays State University in Kansas. Also proud to be in the Tiger family. I like to mention them on every speech I'm on because they were really a huge part of what made me into the educator that I am today. But I became a teacher in 2010. I graduated 2009 in the fall, and I began my career at a Head Start program in Salina, Kansas, and I was fresh out of college. So just like Head Start is for kids, it was an incredible foundation for me, and the program there invested so much in my professional development that I will forever be thankful. Not only did I get to work with students there, but that's where my real work with families began. And those that are familiar with the Head Start model know that supporting families is a huge, huge part of their mission. So I got to go on home visits and work with my family consultant, whose regular job it was to work with the families every single day. And through that, it really helped me get to know the needs of the families and the students I was serving. So life did lead me back to Winfield, where I went to college, and I've been here for the last 6 or 7 years. And Winfield is a rural town, and we're about 12,000 people right on the Oklahoma border. And I work for the public school system and the special services cooperative here. Something really special and unique about our town is that we fully fund preschool for any 4-year-old. So if you're 4 years old, you can come to preschool for free, regardless of income or ability. And I didn't really know how uncommon that was when I began teaching. So our enrollment in our community of 4-year-olds is close to 100%, whereas statewide it's not even half that. We also serve 3-year-olds with special needs. We have an incredibly awarded Parent as Teachers program that has their own pre-K program for 3-year-olds who might not otherwise qualify, and just incredible, incredible dedication to early childhood in our community. And so I'm super proud to be from here. This year I'm not teaching because as National Teacher of the Year, I am on sabbatical. And so I spend the year speaking and advocating on behalf of students and teachers all over our country. But as you can see, I have a great time in my classroom and I'm missing it a lot, which is why I like to share some pictures of my students and the resident volunteers at Cumbernauld Village, where my classroom is housed typically. Now, during the pandemic, it is not there. My long-term sub is back in our early learning center where we house all of our public preschools, but I'll get a little bit more into that later. It's definitely bittersweet to be gone because I get to do things like connect with all of you in the middle of a workday. But one of the things that I miss most is the stories of the hilarious things that my students say. And one recent story that I remember is at nap time. So when I teach a full day of pre-K, nap time is important because I don't have any specials or recess aids. I have to be with my kids all the time. So nap time is my planned time. So I have an hour where I need them to rest. So I will pull out all the stops to get that to happen. And one student asked me to sing to him. And so I said, okay, I have a background in show choir. Like, I am a great singer. He's going to love this. As soon as I started singing, he said, oh, never mind. I'm already asleep. And I thought, that little turd, he did not appreciate my years of musical experience. But wow, that kid was so hilarious, and that is one of my favorite stories to laugh about. He was also a really challenging student, one of the most challenging students that I have ever had. He was the kind of kid that comes to you just so dysregulated that at the end of the day, you as an educator might be in tears wondering what you're doing wrong, what else you could do to help. And he really reminded me of someone who's so close to me, and that's my big sister. So our home life as kids was loud, and it was chaotic, and it was full of emotional turmoil. By all appearances, we were a typical middle-class family with 3 kids, but undiagnosed mental health issues and verbal aggression between my caregivers were just a couple of the things going on behind closed doors. And I don't say this to blame my parents or put them on blast. I don't blame them for what happened to them because I truly believe that they were doing the best that they knew how to do with the skills that we had. I mention this because it really helps connect to my purpose and because I think we often mistake a semblance of financial stability to mean homes without childhood trauma. But I know through experience that this is not the case. So my older sister, pictured here, the taller one in the pictures, but I'm taller now, who my challenging student reminded me so much of, was really troubled as a little girl. Her behavior wasn't really aggressive until she became an adult, but as a kid, she was anxious and hypervigilant. She had night terrors. She got overwhelmed frequently. She had lots of academic learning issues. But the issues that got addressed for her at school were only the academic issues. And at home, she was punished for those shortcomings and also punished for her emotional outburst. So her behaviors as a young kid turned into a teenager who did things like lie and steal and run away and buck authority. She got pregnant with my first nephew right after she turned 18, which some people do, but she was definitely not ready for that. A lot of decisions in her life and experiences led her to become an addict. And now she's been in and out of jail. She's jumped from one abusive partner to the next and sometimes lives out of her car. Every time I get a phone call from an unknown number, I wonder if it's the call that no one ever wants to receive about a loved one. And even sitting here right now, as an adult, I still feel guilty that I wasn't able to save her from the reality that so many of our students face. I am racked with guilt, wondering what was different about me. Why did I deserve to escape these destructive patterns that she didn't deserve? What little experiences shaped her life that didn't happen to me? And why couldn't I help her? But it wasn't me that failed my sister. It was the result of holes in our system that's bent on society, society's rewards and punishment, and these Band-Aid solutions to these adaptive challenges that we have in our lives. My parents were overwhelmed. The school was overwhelmed. No one had the skills that they needed to help my sister. But can you imagine the outcome had my sister or my family had the services that some organizations provide today? I dream about a really different life for her, and I don't want this to happen to any other child. So I am a career preschool teacher, but I know that my life has been leading me to advocate for the power of social emotional learning too, at all ages. People, when they hear social emotional learning, might think it's just a buzz phrase, but I'm here to tell you that it is so much more. It is about giving people the strength and the skills that they need to cope with the ups and downs of life right now, not just in the future. And this is one reason that early childhood education is so important. Our brains are developing most rapidly between the ages of 0 and 5 years old, but they don't stop there. Our brains aren't fully developed until around the age of 24. I was a teacher before I was 24, and so I like to joke that those years don't count because my brain wasn't fully developed. But we must address the social emotional needs of our students at all ages, just as intentionally as we address their academic needs. I just want to make sure people know how much I care about that when I talk so much about early childhood education. I recently read a book called Born for Love by Maya Soldovitz and Dr. Bruce Perry. It talks about the power of empathy and what it is and how it's formed, why it's important, and how it's threatened in our modern world. And the authors say, the gifts of our biology are a potential, not a guarantee. Empathy is not born into us. It is conditioned, it is learned. From the earliest moments that we are born, when we're looking into the faces of our caregivers, we're building mirror neurons with every face and sound that we copy. We are learning to be in tune with others. And though the authors specifically highlight empathy in their book, I truly believe the same thing is true about most social emotional skills. We don't innately know how to get along with peers and solve problems. What we innately know how to do is to survive. And sometimes that's needlessly at the expense of other people. So many of the patterns created in our brain are created at a young age, like my sister's, and then our behavior later draws on those patterns. And that often sends people into this lifetime circle of trauma. And I like to think about patterns as rules. So if I say something like 5, 4, 3, 2, you might fill that in with 1 automatically because you learned that when you were young and you know it to be true. Our experiences in childhood shape the way that our brains develop, and they shape the patterns that exist inside of our brain. We carry those patterns with us, even the ones that are negative. But there are ways to rewire your brain. It takes work, and it takes a lot of people helping. And we, as educators, are part of the solution in changing these patterns to positive ones. If you look up the statistics of childhood trauma in our country, you might be surprised. I was. When we talk about trauma a lot as educators, we talk about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. It could be anything on this list, from academic or economic hardship to living with a parent or caregiver who has a drug or alcohol problem, mental illness in the family, domestic violence, family member in jail, being treated or judged unfairly due to your race or ethnicity, the death of a loved one that is your caregiver. In our country, children between the ages of 0 and 17 that experience 2 or more of these, that percentage is 20.5%. And that just overwhelms me. I think that's 20.5% too many. And there are lots of kids that maybe even aren't getting reported. There are some that are suffering from only one of these, which have huge impacts on the trauma in their lives. But I know that we can't possibly tackle all of these setbacks only within our school setting after the child turns 5 years old. Trauma, hardships, and lack of resources affect large populations of families in the United States. And the story of our country for early childhood is that only 34% of 4-year-olds in the U.S. receive free preschool, in those critical years between 0 to 5. And this is specifically about 4-year-olds. Even fewer receive any services from 0 to 3. So that's 1.5 million students. And the number 1.5 million sounds like a lot, but that actually leaves 3.5 million students potentially underserved. Some states are moving ahead in this race, and some are leaving kids without access. Some 4-year-olds might have family resources to be enrolled in a private program, but there are millions of children in our country that go without any early childhood experience at all, furthering the education gap and the likelihood of academic and social emotional struggles later in their lives. We may not be reaching 3.5 million 4-year-olds. We need early childhood programs. We need to equip our families and students with skills and connections that will become the armor they need to thrive. And I want to talk to you about one way my district and I are doing that. So I mentioned before that my classroom is housed inside of a nursing home and retirement village. And this came about through the Early Childhood Readiness Coalition, which identified the need for more full-day preschool opportunities in our community. In Kansas, we've recognized that our current education model is largely based on the Henry Ford factory model, and that we have been serving old needs in a new world with new problems. And through this way of thinking, our community partnership formed with Cumbernauld Village, the nursing home and retirement village where my classroom is housed. And so I'm going to show you a video about how powerful the connections are to our community in this setting. And now, Dennis, if for some reason the sound isn't playing, do let me know.
My name is Jesse Hatfield. They call me Grandpa Jess. I'm being 91 years old next week. Greet the children every morning when they come in to quarter late. And it's very, very wonderful feeling. It's just a real neat experience.
I want to say hi to all the little kids that are going to see this. My name is Cecil Thompson. This year I'll be 94 years old. I've been here 5 years. And I'm sure glad when we start bringing these young children in so we can be with them. I enjoy them. I get to see them every day. I'm here when they come in. I'm the great-grandfather for 2 great-grandkids, but they live in Chicago. I don't get to see them, but I see these kids here every day.
My name is Benny Long, and I'm a grandma to the kids. I enjoy coming down and reading to them on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Usually on Tuesday and Thursdays, I come down and play with them. And they're just very enthusiastic, very, very loving.
My name is Ed Foster. I've been here at Cumbernauld about 3.5 years. I'm a former teacher in public schools and at Southwestern College in Winfield. And I've had experience from the kindergarten through college. But I've never been more challenged than I have been with the little bikes. They're tough, but aren't they sweet?
What do you think, Roger? What do you like to do with the kids?
With the kids? Oh, I just like to be around them and interact with them.
Your next question has to do with what it has done and its impact on my home life. I have to tell you that
until you're 90 years old, you really don't know how you're going to feel. But I felt several years ago like I had already done anything I could possibly do. I'm almost ready to say that I gave up on an awful lot of my interests, my activities. And I have a little trouble expressing this, but I wake up in the morning so totally different than I did just a year ago. I have a reason for getting up. I have sung all my life, but I've never had the feedback that I get for singing for these kids. Now I see little 4-year-old kids responding in a way that I have never received before.
And do you want to tell the story about what a kid asked you
Oh, yes.
about the war?
You know, I always ask the children, do you have any questions you'd like to ask me? And yes, they do. And sometimes they kind of get off track. But I was kind of taken aback by this question. I said, I was on a battleship in the Navy in World War II. And they said, were you killed in the war? And I said, I don't think so, I'm here. So many questions like that when they're asking you never know what they're going to ask. But they're so cute. And they're so serious. Thank you.
Thank you.
That last bit there is sort of the levity I need after tearing up, after I've watched this hundreds of times, from the story. But that's how powerful the experience is. And did you see all of the connection that was happening in the video? Connection not only with peers and classroom staff, but other positive adults in our community. Some of our residents live on the healthcare side of the nursing home, but some are in apartments or garden homes and still active outside of the retirement village. I know that connection is vital to our emotional well-being, and I am a huge fan of conscious discipline, which, if you haven't heard of it, is this brain-based and trauma-informed approach to teaching. And honestly, it's sort of that approach to life in general, too. But through my research in conscious discipline and about trauma in the brain, I've learned just how vital that connection is. Dr. Becky Bailey, the founder of Conscious Discipline, says, willingness comes from connection. She means the willingness to learn, to interact, and to act safely and with empathy. It all starts with connection. And there are some key components to connecting with other people. Those include eye contact, presence, touch, and playfulness. All of these things are helping our students at all ages create new and healthy patterns in their brains. It's quicker work for students who already have these healthy patterns and a little bit longer work for those who don't, but it is so worth it. I know that one thing we're all missing during this pandemic is that touch. It's a critical piece of connection to others, and we are living in a time where it's not safe. And I would never tell you to do something that isn't safe, but I would suggest that you find ways to bolster the other areas of connection, eye contact, presence, and playfulness. And find alternatives to the touch piece of that connection. You can see here a few alternatives. One is me during our drive-by graduation. I could not imagine not hugging or high-fiving or celebrating with my students. They drove by and we celebrated, and I created this device that was 6 foot long to give them high fives with, sanitized between each kid. It didn't really matter at that point that we weren't touching. They just knew the intent behind was that I wanted to connect with them. And it bolstered those other things that we were doing, like celebrating and being careful or being playful together. Way back in April, I hadn't seen my best friend in a few months, which was very uncommon as she lives 20 minutes away from me. And I ended up driving to her town to do her son's drive-by birthday parade, zero contact. And when I saw her from a distance, 15 feet away, I wept, couldn't control myself crying, just the sight of her. Well, fast forward a few months later in July, we felt safe enough to gather in a small group outside of about 4 of us. And I didn't weep that time, but it was different because I felt awkward. Like I'd forgotten how to interact with my best friend of 20 years. It was the strangest out-of-body sort of thing. And imagine how that's working in the brains of our children. We have to make these connections a priority right now. We cannot forget them. I told you a sad story earlier, but now I want to tell you a happy story. I want to tell you how the partnership and the connections with Cumbernauld Village shaped one of my students' lives. So I had a student last year who I'll call Sarah, and Sarah struggled with emotional regulation and communication about her needs. She was sensitive and she was extremely hurt by really small transgressions of her peers. She would yell at teachers and staff, lose control of her emotions, and would sometimes sob for these extended periods of time where she was unable to be comforted by adults. And she often said, "I don't want to come to school," and she would melt down at drop-off time. Well, when we would leave our classroom or when people would come into our classroom to interact with us that lived at Cumbernauld Village, Sarah's pouty demeanor would begin to change. She would use gentle touches and smiles, and she loved to hear their stories. She would often come back and report to me things like, "Did you know that Grandma Sue used to ring the bell at her schoolhouse recess when it was over?" And I could see every day that the more positive interactions that she had with our school community, the more her skills with her peers blossomed too. And so I gathered all of this anecdotal data, but there was a feeling in me as a special education early childhood teacher that wanted to put some numbers to it. So I did a little experiment and I kept track of how many positive interactions Sarah was getting each day. I followed her around with my little clicker just through one day, and I counted how many positive adult interactions she got. So this included high fives, conversations, smiles, hugs, and any positive reinforcement from adults, volunteers, and staff. It was 53. She got 53 positive interactions with supportive adults in one day. An average school year is 180 days, so that would mean by the end of the year, she would get around 10,000 positive interactions because of this beautiful partnership. And that just takes my breath away. And I said before that willingness comes from connection. Well-connected kids feel safe, they feel loved, and they are able to access the learning centers of their brains way better than kids who are not connected. I know this viscerally, and I know this as a professional. I know this from my experience both in and out of the classroom. Kids from all types of homes and all types of situations are in need of this connection. My sister needed it. The little boy who couldn't sleep when I was singing needed it. All students need it. Partnerships with our community are helping this happen. Now, during this pandemic, we are facing unique challenges to keep these partnerships growing. And here are some things happening in our community to stay connected, to remind ourselves emotionally and physiologically that we are still trying and we still want to stay in a relationship with each other. We're doing what we can in a time that we never expected. We're doing things like window visits where we draw messages and words on the outside of the windows for our grandmas and grandpas. We're sending them pictures of ourselves with homemade signs and messages. We're hanging up murals of them and the kids in different public areas, working with the activities director at the nursing home. Playing tic-tac-toe on the windows. We are doing Zoom calls. We have some grandparent volunteers who have their own devices and have downloaded Zoom, or employees at the nursing home have also downloaded it and are helping us facilitate that. There's a picture of a box here for kids to come to our school and turn in pictures and Christmas cards to distribute to the local nursing homes. There are ways to stay connected during this time. None of them feel as good as being in person. But we know that during hard times that we need to get through it, and we get through it best together. We can handle this just like we're handling all of our other big problems and big feelings in life. And the way that we're acting right now is directly teaching our kids how to react down the road for further challenges and obstacles that they need to overcome. They are learning from us in these moments and how we remain calm and we respond versus react to our feelings, and we keep each other connected and loved and keep each other safe, and we have empathy for one another. This is actually, I think it's going to be a really integral time in the lives of our kids, and they're going to look back on it and they are going to grow from this or they are going to suffer from this. And that's sort of up to us as the adults. We as educators and staff, we just can't get caught up too much on things like test scores and academic content that we forget the very thing that's essential to our lives, and that's connection to others. Invest your time in connecting, and the rest will come so much more naturally. Those things are important too, but connection has to happen first. At this time, I really want to connect this piece of advocacy to what we're talking about with community connections. This charge is near and dear to my heart, being an advocate for people who don't have a voice, for people whose voice needs to be a little louder, for people who need representation. And right now, our kids, our families, our teachers need representation. As teachers, we have to ask ourselves, what can we do to keep education moving forward and to keep it representing the needs of our students? You know, I've never been a quiet person. Literally the only thing I ever got in trouble for at school was talking. I know that's super hard to imagine, but not everybody is that loud, okay? And that's okay. I learned a lesson at the Kansas Leadership Center in the last several years when I've been participating in a lot of their trainings, is that leadership is an activity, not a position. Ed O'Malley is the author of a book that says that. He has lots of great books about leadership. But it reminds me that not everybody is a loud leader, okay? Leadership has nothing to do with authority or the volume of your voice. Whether you are quiet or loud, you have the capacity to lead. All of our voices have the power to be heroic, whatever their volume. And it's now more important than ever that we're using those voices to represent the needs of our students, of our coworkers, and of our profession. Our schools are in the spotlight. They have been for the last 9 months. They will continue to be, for better or worse. And we have the opportunity to shout from the rooftops the things that we've known all along because people are listening. We know the nuances of our profession better than anyone. My advice to educators and administrators in this time is to connect with people who love the career and stay inspired. Advocate for education and its worth on every platform you have with every chance that you get. I often say to groups of educators that if you are on social media and you're not using it to further the cause of education, then you are missing an opportunity. You have power, and that power is also a responsibility. We are the people who are going to keep education moving and growing. As National Teacher of the Year, this is something that I say a lot. You can love something an awful lot and still want it to change and grow. Loyalty to the way it's always been serves the past. Educators learn from the past, but we serve the future. And one way we can do this is to keep reevaluating our purpose and to reflect on the needs of the kids that we have now, not the kids that we had 20 years ago. What do they need now that will best serve them and our society in the future? Because we're serving the future too. This sign hangs in my classroom, and it was a gift from a student that I think about all the time. And it says, "From tiny seeds grow mighty trees." We all, families, schools, communities, nourish the tree and build strong roots that contribute to the health of the tree for the generations to follow. I'm spending my year advocating not only for more early childhood experiences, but for building social emotional skills and connections to the community at every level. I understand the power of working together to make sure we're reaching students wherever they are. And I know that those connections that we help them build will be the armor that they need to thrive in their lives. We are going to have some time for questions here in just a couple of minutes, but I want to thank you so much for having me here today. I am honored, as always, to represent and be a conduit for the love and the hard work of all of the teachers and families and students in our country. I would love for you to connect with me on social media, because connections with you do give me strength too. You can follow me on Twitter. You can follow me on Instagram, on Facebook. I have a National Teacher of the Year page there. Pretty easy to find. If you're interested in having me come and speak at any of your events, I do things like speak to future educators and speak to current educators, emerging, aspiring. Those are the two words I was looking for earlier. Help provide PD about things that I care about and I'm passionate about that have to do with a lot of the platforms I spoke about today. I would love to continue to connect with you. That's what this year is for. I'm giving up this year in my classroom so that I can continue to make these relationships with teachers everywhere, and I'm so glad to do that. Again, I want to thank you for listening, for joining in, for having the courage to continue to get professional development in this crazy time. I appreciate you. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Dennis now, and I will stop sharing my screen, and we can find out if we had any questions.
Well, either you answered them all, Tabitha, during your wonderful presentation, the silence, one of the two. I've asked people to share their questions. What we've seen in other sessions is that people may not post their questions on the chat room, but will follow up questions directly to you. So I really appreciate you sharing your contact information.
Of course. Yeah, and I would love to. Like I said, if you can't think of a question now, I'm often kind of like that, and I'll be reflecting later and think of one. Reach out to me. I answer my DMs. I'm a lot quicker on Twitter than I am on Facebook, because Facebook is, I don't know, bulky and kind of hard to use, I think, their messaging feature. But yeah, definitely reach out to me. I would love to answer your question. I will say one thing that I get a lot is wondering about what the plans are for the future in the nursing home. And our plan is to definitely move back to that. Like, we have not given up on that. My classroom is still there. I go when I can, very infrequently, in order to keep the community safe there. But we are itching to get back, and they're itching to have us back there too.
I will also remind folks that this session, once it's formally over, will pop up as a recorded session. So if you have friends and family or colleagues who should have been here but can't, and want to listen to a really excellent presentation that covers an important portal of entry for our traditional K-12 system, this is a chance for you to do that. And with Tabitha putting up her contact information, will give you a chance to continue the contact and communication, and maybe even the conversation after this. So,
absolutely.
Okay, well, absent any questions, I suggest that we give you back the rest of your day. Thank you so much for being kind enough to join us. And again, congratulations on being the National Teacher of the Year, but also our first preschool teacher. I think it's a wonderful testament to our profession that we recognize and finally recognize the importance of preschool education.
I agree. Thank you so much. This was a step forward.
All right. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye, everybody.